he was talking about in a talent management department, they do this thing called succession planning, right? You look at 100 employees, you think, who could be the one that could be our new chief marketing officer, right? And you run a succession plan for that coveted chief marketing officer. And what do you do to prepare for this meeting as the HR leader? You look at these 100 employees, performance review data. You might look at like Myers-Briggs or DISC or some type of like work style assessment that they've done over the years. Each of these data sources have thousands of pages of documents, and you might need an analyst from the tech department to kind of aggregate this information. So I don't know, data analysts, about $250,000 a year, I think. And so what I've seen done and what Ian and I were talking about is the data that could take days and days, weeks to get, you could have in minutes by having a system ready that can take these very disparate, different formats. It's like merging something from like a PDF and Excel, right? It's like you can't do it. You're doing screenshots, and that's it. It's taking the data and bringing it together and then just creating a rough framework to make sense so you have a running start for that meeting. That's a quick example we were just talking about earlier. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity for sure.
So guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. I've got Jaime Klein here with me today. Now, this is going to be an amazing story because we're going to talk about the current status of human resources, right? You see in the sign behind her, if you're watching on YouTube, Inspire Human Resources. Jaime started this business out of a personal experience and has been dominating the world of HR ever since. So Jaime, let's talk a little bit about your story and your heart and hustle. What was the catalyst that kind of pushed you to be the entrepreneur, the founder of Inspire?
Well, I appreciate it. And I just was so looking forward to our time together. So thanks for having me. I have always been in HR. I've been in HR since I started working, and have been blessed to work at places you might know of, including American Express. And the doctor said to my husband and I, surprised you're with twins. And he had just gotten into business school at night at NYU, was going to work during the day, and I was going to work. And then life happens. We planned, God laughs. Our twins, who are now 20 and healthy, they came early and had some health hiccups. So I needed to be laser focused on them hitting their potential. And I had this idea to do this crazy thing in Q4 of 2006. I was like, what if I work from home part-time around their schedule? And no one was kind of doing it back then. So I thought, there was this company called NetJets, and there were, timeshares for condos. I was like, what if we do this thing called like fractional HR? And I swear to God, if someone else was offering it, I would have just worked for them, but no one was doing it. And we were kind of, as far as I know, one of the first movers. And I'm always really authentic about my story because I think that there are a lot of badass people out there who are thinking of starting their own company. And I'm on panels and people will say, hey, why did you start your company? And all the panelists will say, well, given the confluence of factors in the market. And I'm like, look, no one's crazy enough to do this unless something really big happens. So I'm really honest about my big, what happened with our kids who are now, in college and crushing it, because I think it just being authentic helps other people kind of be brave to do the same thing. So that's my why. But what I am is mission driven about all the 15 plus folks that work for us. I always say fractional work makes us whole, and them working fractionally lets them show up for whatever they've got, raising kids. We've got breast cancer survivors doing, fundraising. We've got someone who just dropped their third record. She sounds like Barbara Streisand. And I want them to, live their big, juicy lives too, while they're crushing it, doing beautiful work. So that's my backstory.
So I had another guest on another podcast that I host with one of my really good friends, Dante, and we were talking to a very successful founder, right? And he was talking about one of the biggest things that we misconstrue today in the world of business is a lot of negativity, if you will, gets thrown at the idea of like a lifestyle entrepreneur or a lifestyle founder. And when I was thinking about our upcoming conversation, I was like, Jaime's the perfect example of what designing a business around your lifestyle can do for you, but also your team as well. So when you think about fractional, right, what did that mean to you in the early days, and how has that kind of terminology evolved, I guess?
Sure. I mean, straight up, what it truly meant was having two preemie twins trying to crawl, like around our living room with me having a desk. It wasn't really even a desk. It was legit. It was literally more of a small table that had been in the trash area of our apartment building. I was like, this will make a great desk. I wish I still had it. Anyway, so this desk / table was in the corner of the room, with like the Elmo, Don, like the Thomas the Train stuff. Um, and it looked like, for real, it looked like me meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs in '06, figuring out how to do this. It looked like me setting up shop Jan 1 of '07 and sending an email to like, I don't know, like my roommate's parents from college, like anyone I had ever met. And I was like, hey, I've hung my shingle. If you know anyone who wants help with to hire, train, and retain talent, I'm available. And what it really looked like was when they were with a babysitter or doing whatever kids do, I would crush it. And what I want you to know is, again, Darren was at NYU at night and is getting his MBA. So I would get online, I don't know, like 7 p.m. And I swear to God, it was like all these female entrepreneurs were all so busy. And between 7 and 12, women just were getting things done back in '07. Companies hadn't figured out quite yet how to harness our superpowers working from home part-time. And then I could go on. There I was at the playground, like pushing swings and talking to other parents. And I was like, hey, what did you used to do? And they're like, oh yeah, I used to run the trading desk at JP Morgan. Oh yeah, I used to, design ties for J. Crew. And I was kind of like, what are we all doing here? Like, we love our kids, but we have these other parts of ourselves that we haven't used. So I had this idea to just kind of work fractionally. And so what that meant was our first client was a high growth venture backed company who needed someone 20 hours a week to do HR. And then a Fortune 100 company found out that I was available, and they brought me in for a parental leave. We've done 31 parental leaves at that company. And then we got more requests than I could do with the availability I had. So I started recruiting some of these people that I'd meet in the playground who were in the HR space. And then I did my master's at Columbia, and there were a bunch of Columbia Master's Program alum folks that I knew, old colleagues from Amex. And so we recruited everyone really on the team has either been through, um, someone I've worked with, someone who's been, in my ecosystem, then people that we recruited are experts, then their network. So everyone has really come through that personal recommendation, except for maybe probably, this is our 19th year, probably 5 people have been without that personal endorsement. And that, I've done this a long time. We're only as good as our last project. I'm always humbled every single time we launch. So, but yeah, that is what Fractional looked like. It was working, kind of like being a workaholic around the hours that worked for raising our kids. Yeah, that's really it.
The progression of this is so beautiful to me because we're talking about you being able to show up as your best self when you had the ability to do so. And that didn't mean that you were turning a part of yourself off, but you're going to show up as a complete badass very transparently, get this work done,
Oh yeah.
and do exactly what people are asking for. Were there any hesitancies in those early days about the whole
Oh my God.
fractional element?
Totally.
Right? What was that like?
Totally. I feel like I need to have a drink before I even answer this question. So I remember standing in a conference room, like this big mahogany, like 16 big cushy seats around a big table in this boardroom. And I was saying to this team, and I'll be available 20 hours a week. This is like Feb of '07. I'll be available, between 1 and 5 every day. There is a lack of the lived experience of having to show up knowing that you're from a marginalized group and having to kind of find that seat at the table in the big mahogany boardroom, and also sometimes flex and do all sorts of calisthenics to hit the goals that you want. So anyway, it happened to be a room of that avatar of people, and they literally said, there's no way, absolutely, this, like, what are you talking about? And I remember my face turning crimson red and me just saying, give me a shot. I didn't know what else to say. So yes, the quick answer is yes. There were a lot of folks who are like, I don't get it. And I once heard someone say, it's like, this is dating me. It was like, I heard someone at a conference in '07 say, like, if you hire Michael Jordan to like work like 20 hours a week, you still will get like 300% of an average player. So I just tried to show up that way. And then there were articles that would show up in like the Times and the Journal talking about this concept of what they then called, women working part-time in really cerebral roles. And I had a section of our original website that was called HR trends. And I would post those articles there so I could just give some credibility to just the concept as it arose. And clients, they had heard of fractional tech firms, like help desk firms, or fractional law firms. But I didn't know anyone who was doing HR. And HR tends to be kind of a not so exciting, kind of, cost center group, if you will. So I don't know that, high growth companies, large companies had kind of thought yet that this was needed, but it just really, but yeah, so that is what interim looked like. And I'll share with you, I was at a great holiday party back in December of this group that I love called Troop HR. And I feel like half the people there were talking about how they either are hiring fractional workers or they themselves are fractional workers. And I swear to God, I just had this moment where like, I don't really drink, but I just like sat back and like had a drink of my seltzer with lemon. I was like, this is so fun. I feel like I was with my people and it just felt great. There's even a group now called Fractional People, and it's like a newsletter that goes out. So it feels great that we can just do the work and not have to explain the ROI. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing, because over the last years, right, especially because of the pandemic, I mean, you started long before this, right? But leaders now have a different perspective about what their teams look like, right? I mean, me personally at my company, Francis, we leverage like fractional resources from across the globe. And we started back in 2014, right? We thought that it was never going to be possible to build a business with resources that were not in our building every single day.
Yeah.
But now leaders think about that completely different. So how have you kind of thinking about with your guys' expertise, right, in fractional leadership? What are some of the current challenges, right, that many organizations are facing when it comes to HR? We've seen so much turbulence in the marketplace and jobs and everything like that. So what are some of your trends that you're kind of macro identifying?
Yeah. And I just want to plus one on what you said about just the whole, the tapestry of the way that work gets done. It looks so different. I think that the most modern organizations, they've decided we're always going to have a permanent core group. And then around the edges, we're going to have these folks that we dial up and dial down, and we don't need to carry the salary and the benefits. And that way we can stay agile and sustainable as a company and also import amazing talent for that key project. You might not need that expert forever, but boy, did you need them for a year. So yes to that. Okay, big trends. So if we had spoke last, I don't know, let's say 150 days ago, I'd probably have a different answer than what I'm going to give as the top trend. But in the last 100 days here in the US, the new administration's executive orders and their opinion around DEI being woven into the way that companies measure performance of recruiting and retaining top talent has been, I'll use the word distracting. So our ecosystem has spent a tremendous amount of time, money, resources, particularly since the summer of 2020, that overdue racial reckoning. They've spent a lot of energy setting up these programs to help people understand their own blind spots and make sure that folks from traditionally marginalized groups have the barriers taken down so they can get that seat at the table, because boy, do we need diversity at the top of the house of every industry to like just be innovative. And now, for real, a client said to me recently, like as an example of how distracted people are. So big picture, people very much want to keep up all these great programs that help advance, help import and retain people from diverse lived experiences. And they are really concerned about what those programs are called. And if they are, if there are any metrics associated with them, that the way that the government, for example, has been told to take a look at those things, are nervous that down the road they could be in trouble. They're not a government contractor. They're a small company, public company, but they want to get in front of it. So for example, a client said to me, we were talking about a really important issue. She said, I am distracted today. I'm about to sign our annual healthcare benefit renewal. We offered gender affirming care. And I'm nervous to put my signature on that document because who knows what's ahead? What if another 100 days I could personally get sued for that? Or another organization. Anyway, I could give you lots of examples. High potential programs that used to be for women to be in, managing director tracks at a big four firm. They just they just don't offer that program as of February. So I know a team that had like stood up that program and they don't offer it. Companies are thinking, should we call our department not DEI, but transparency, fairness, equity? So it's that kind of stuff. So that's a trend. But at the core, I hosted a salon. We do a monthly gathering of folks in very senior leadership roles to talk about the things keeping them up at night. And a recent conversation was around how do we still do the great work, but not put the company at risk, like really threading that needle. It's a powerful conversation to be part of, and everyone wants to keep those initiatives going. So figuring out how to create these transparent cultures, fair, et cetera, that's one trend. And who would have thought it would have been such a focus? Because anyway, 2, AI. Everyone and their brothers figuring out how to, again, insulate their company from risk, but utilize the force of AI to reimagine the way that data and information flows through organizations. So a lot of our clients have us looking at people and process. We're always looking to, assess how do we make your HR department better, and figuring out how to really elegantly, safely weave in machine learning, bots, whatever is needed to the whole employee experience so that we can create cost efficiencies, team effectiveness. And I just feel like no one's going to lose their job because of AI, but people who don't know how to use AI could be at risk, right? So let's give you that time back to do more strategic work. The other thing is return to the office. I speak to everyone. No one has figured that one out. And anybody who tells you that they figured it out, they're not telling you their truth.
Yeah.
So, there are a couple of kind of bellwether companies, Chase, Goldman Sachs. They're like in finance, as an example of a sector, they're kind of the market leader. And then a lot of our organizations really look to them for guidance. We're seeing a lot of organizations ask people to very much be back on site. So that's a huge thing that folks are trying to figure out. And I just always say, whatever we do, we need to create moments that matter. Like if people are coming in, you can't be sitting next to somebody. They're on Zoom, you're on Zoom. Like it just is not as effective. But I think, that was a huge shift that happened so fast, but we don't realize that typically these trends take decades of human experience to kind of, indoctrinate the way that we work. And that all happened so fast. And I think we're still figuring out what it means now in a 5-year after, we're in a post pandemic moment. We're 5 years out. So DEI, AI, and return to office, also called RTO. So I'm like acronym city with all DEI, AI, and RTO. But those 3 things, there are others, but those are the top 3. And it's only the beginning of Q2. Who knows what's next? Yeah.
If the Hart Hustle podcast has ever sparked any idea or made you think differently, do us a favor. Make sure you guys share this, post it on LinkedIn, or even text that nonprofit friend that you just have. Whatever works, this is what keeps the conversation going and allows us to just grow this community together. Seriously, we appreciate you.
I'm so interested in this DEI conversation, right? So we put in so much concentrated and intentional effort into building systems and processes that help people feel recognized at the end of the day for their unique attributes, right? We're really talking about inclusion, right? And being able to include everybody in their unique experiences. How do you kind of navigate these conversations with leaders who decided to, at one point in time, shutter a program? Like you said, we had a team who worked on a complete program and now it's been shuttered. So like, how does that maybe change your perception of that organization leader? Does it? How do you then recenter yourself to be the supportive partner who can help them navigate this uncertain future?
So I talk a lot about self-care for HR leaders. My sister's a vet. That is an industry that has a lot of turnover and actually health issues among vets because they put down animals. It's really, really stressful. I cannot compare to what she does during the day, but like I talk a lot recently, the last 4 years, about self-care for HR because we're always holding space for as a sacred, like as a very confidential sounding board for organizations. And sometimes the things that they say are intense. So for starters, I just think anyone on earth, but HR, because we're talking about, should up self-care so that you can like get that deep breath as a client says, we're dismantling the program that we hired a whole team to do. And for real, I would love for a leader to get up on the town hall stage and say this. As you know, we're just working and living and parenting in very unique times. In order to keep our company sustainable, we're going to be making some changes to ensure that we can be a modern organization to meet this moment. We care about you deeply as a human. You might hear some rebranding. Just know we're still leading with heart. Like I would love for, but instead, this is what I've heard. Organizations getting up and say, we're bringing in our new intern class. And as you know, the key metric for that is always merit. And everyone's thinking, but wait a second, in last year's town hall, you talked about how the intern class had to have a diversity of lived experience. We never talked about merit. Like they're adults. They understand that organizations have very quickly changed their script. And so how do I do what I'm trying to coach leaders to do is be as authentic as they feel comfortable doing, but don't try to spin it so that everyone forgets that we made them go into mandatory training to how to conduct an interview without bias, made them go into mandatory training to understand your blind spots. Like we did all that stuff, especially the last patch of years. And so that I don't love when leadership teams pretend that they all suddenly got amnesia, because then it really discounts the beautiful work and the heartfelt messages that came out. So, so how do I handle, I think one, just every industry, but because we're talking about HR, do a lot of self-care to steady yourself, yoga, breathing, whatever your thing is. And then also just make sure that you, I don't know, I think with HR, you have to like thread the needle. You have to insulate the company from risk and also create like this best place to work experience. But when you see these programs dismantled, it makes me feel that they're like people are doing what's on trend. So like the dismantling of the program, for example, that was maybe 53 days after the inauguration and the new administration started. So now we're like 100 plus days out. And I hear people more say, we used to call it the high potential program for female attorneys. And now we're just going to call it the high potential program. And I'm like, good, way to not dismantle it, just rebrand it and still very much look to help people rise. But let's be honest, the reason that a lot of these systems were put in place at organizations and in our country was because unfortunately, there's systemic racism in the US and it's built into our system. So there is all these barriers to entry just to get to the right elementary school where you can get the great after school program that teaches you to be a girl that codes. And then you have to get in the door for the interview. And maybe you're from a family where the first generation and generational wealth wasn't passed on. Well, guess what? Someone's going to open that door for you. And then you're ready. When you get in the door, someone at the table better say, I've saved a seat for you, because it is really lonely stepping into these mahogany walled boardrooms and being the only fill in the blank. So it's the whole in like recruiting and belonging. So these programs were in place for a reason. And I want everyone to thrive, but we need to make sure that, you know, we're all, we're just trying to do our best as humans to create those equal playing fields. I could go on for a long time, but those are like the top line.
I mean, I just love the element that we're talking about consistency here, right? Because us as people, as human beings at the end of the day, need to recognize that when we hide changes, right, or challenging times from our employees, naturally we can see through that stuff like a smokescreen. And so it's like, we just want you to be authentic about what's happening in this current moment and talk to us about how we're going to transition to a better place. Because I think it's natural and is human innate for us to be able to understand that something is up. But when our organizations say, now the incoming intern class is all based on merit, it's like, hold on, I'm not a child. I do remember what we said here from a messaging perspective. Yeah. So why are we not being consistent at the top? And how can we expect our team members to now be consistent in their messaging as well?
And to trust, there's like these, you know, we spend more time working than we do with family and friends in the US, right? So if you're going to spend this much time at work, I think it's so important to trust leadership. We had neighbors over last night for dinner. They're from Belarus and Belarus, excuse me. They're from Belarus, and at dinner, my girlfriend Yulia said, we have 3 years parental leave coverage in Belarus. And I was like, oh my God, we get 3 months. But what she did say in the Belarus, sometimes companies aren't running to hire newlywed 26-year-old females because they know that they have that 3-year parental leave coming up. So, you know, not every other country outside the US has it solved. I think there's so much to work to do globally, but I do think that people really have long-term memories, and they very much remember how, you know, it's like a relationship. You remember most sometimes how people treat you in tough times, even a little bit more than when you know the economy's strong and everyone has a role and all that stuff. So I think you have to just treat people as adults and try to just garner as much trust as you possibly can. Yeah.
And I think we really need a call for great leadership today as well, Jamie. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, being a leader in good times is easy, but being a true leader when times are tough is what actually separates the cream of the crop. You know what I mean?
And it's someone that I admire so much says, you know, we need leadership with a capital L, right? We need leadership really, like you said, for these times. And I think, do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, really strong leaders would do things like say, how are you really, really, really doing? Right. And they would kind of stop and they'd say like, how are things going at home? I know you have, you know, a 2 and a 4-year-old. Are you how's it going with like logging them into their nursery school class? Like it was so tricky. People were like, have you found enough, fresh vegetables in your community? Because they're kind of out. Like people were talking about things on more of a human level. And I think that suddenly what I heard show up in talent reviews, like talent reviews of, thousands of leaders is this. Is that leader authentic? Is that leader able to create a sense of belonging? And I had never heard these terms, humility, creating belong ever discussed. It was more like, are they open to a global reassignment? Are they really good at translating? Are they good at storytelling to like, not line storytelling, but like, can they get up on a big stage and create a sense of vision and tell a story that really brings people along on the journey of how the company is going to get to its ultimate goal? That's what I mean by storytelling, like storytelling in a good way. But now it was more about how are they treating people as a unvarnished, unphotoshopped human just going through a tough time. And like, so that's a quick example. Like that was, I think, a moment of leadership for, say, the start of the pandemic and beyond.
Can I back that up with some stats actually as well?
Please.
So there was a statistic that was shown to me in one of my other podcast guests that talked about employee engagement skyrocketed during the pandemic. Why? Because they were able to see the leaders, the CEO of the organization as a human, because now they were in this environment, not in an ivory tower. But it also goes along with exactly what you just said. When you have leaders who show up and ask questions about you as a human being first before the role that you perform, naturally that connection is, I would say, boosted as well. And that's why you see higher levels of engagement too.
Yes, so it's a great stat. And I think that, leaders can be intimidating, but when you're on Zoom with them and like, the cat's on the keyboard or like the kids running back and forth on their scooter, like you just see them as people who also have tricky days and need to keep a sense of humor.
There's like a moment of recognition where it's like, forever we spent this world where you would think about yourself in two different personalities, right? You've got your home version of yourself, and then you've got your work version of yourself.
Yes.
But then the pandemic blurred those two lines, and leaders had to come to a moment of recognizing, I have to recognize both of these people. This is one opportunity I want to kind of bring up a book that I think is really cool. So there's a guy out there named Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Have you ever heard of him? Gary V on social media?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So Gary Vaynerchuk came out with a book in 2022 called 12 and a Half, which is leveraging the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. And one of Gary's stories is like, hey, listen, I'm the chairman of VaynerX, which is also VaynerMedia. We do media services and marketing for Fortune 100 companies, right? One thing that I'm doing here at my business, which is different, is I'm building a honey empire. Now, don't confuse honey when I say that with something that is soft, because when I believe that, just like the famous saying is, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar, right? I'm trying to create a competitive empire, which means we are going to dominate, but I'm leveraging the skills in 12 and a half. And I want to read off some of these to you and get your opinion. Skill number 1, gratitude. 2, self-awareness, accountability, optimism, empathy, kindness, tenacity, curiosity, patience, conviction, humility, ambition. And the 12 and a half, the half element in here, is kind candor. What do you think about those skill sets of the leaders of the future and how they're going to benefit from really becoming skilled at those things?
Oh, yeah. Yes to all of that. And I actually have had the pleasure of meeting his head of HR, Cloud. Her title is the Chief Hart Officer.
Yes.
Right? So it's really baked in. So I think that is spot on. I think that we're living in, so there's so much happening at once, but I think that showing up as more human is incredibly key. No one, as I said, no one can attract and retain people unless they show up that way. And I also think that we're living and working and doing life in times that there's just a lot coming at us with the economy. I can't think of a part of our country or the world, quite frankly, who has not had some impact from all the large weather systems that have moved through and how that impacts people's sense of safety. Remember like Maslow's hierarchy of need, like before you can get to self-actualization, you need food, water, shelter. And if there is a hurricane that hit or fires that are building a lot of smoke and it's shutting down your school or your town can't do business, these things are terrifying. So yes to all of that, because I think that what we need leaders to do is be really kind and have that candor and say, I know that you're on payroll and you live in the Carolinas, and I know that with Hurricane X coming through, you've really spotty internet access. Like we have other people that are out in Salt Lake City and they're going to cover for you for this payroll run. We've got you. Like just really kind, because if you're, dealing with water in your basement because a hurricane came through, you want to be on point and you want to be on screen and get it done. But
It's
you're also,
impossible.
yeah, it is. It is. So I think that we're in a pretty informal time, and Gen X, Gen Y, they're bringing that to work. Where in contrast, the Gen X, that's the generation I'm in. Oh, sorry. I mean the Gen Y and the Gen Z, I should say. There are newest generations coming in. But myself, Gen X, definitely the boomers and certainly the traditionalists. There are a handful left in the workplace, much more formal, much more boundaried. But yeah, so those 12 and a half, I think, are truly needed. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's switch gears
Mhm.
and let's talk about kind of like, you said it in the very beginning, everybody and their friends are talking about how AI is going to change the future
Yes.
of what we do in work,
Yes.
how we approach it, the tools that we enable our team members with. So in November of 22, OpenAI released ChatGPT,
Mhm.
right? Now, in that time, leaders had a choice to either say, we are going to lean heavy into this future of curiosity and possibilities, or we're going to ignore this stuff completely. Now, HR has always been a human-centered division of organizations. Now, when we talk about this new landscape of AI, how are you kind of approaching this technology, and what is your vision for what it's going to do for people, especially in the HR space?
Yeah. At our HR salon next week, we're having a friend and colleague, Erica Orange. She's literally a futurist, come on and talk about AI. And one of the things that is on her mind is really the convergence of processes with HR and IT over time. So what I think is, yes, I think that every modern organization needs to try it. What we always recommend is that people try even a little bit at home to plan a vacation or find a restaurant just to get comfortable with it, and then very much bring that A game to work and make sure that they're using it almost like a ride along buddy, not an Ivy League intern, but a really ambitious intern, to so that people can think, all right, I've got this to-do list. What are the pieces of joyless work that I can ask my really eager intern to look up, to sort, to collate, to make sense of, with all these disparate pieces of data, so that those employees can do the more strategic work. So I think there's massive opportunity. I also think that there are some risks. So, there is a lot that is not yet known about how the data, like for example, 23andMe just announced, I think they're selling or there's something going on, and someone said it might not be a bad idea to just take a look at your data and make it non-viewable in case that data is now for sale. Like I was thinking of that as an analogy of how so many of us are bringing on AI. There's all different tools, Cloud and Claude rather, and Copilot and Gemini, and some organizations have created their own, and we are all using them. And I just wonder if in 2058, if some of our queries could ever be accessible. I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, just because I never thought that, I don't know anybody that doesn't have a family member that didn't do the swab and do 23andMe. Like 10 years ago, I felt like a lot of people were starting to do that, and it was really illuminating and widening their aperture on their family tree. And I just thought, God, I'd feel so bad if that data that so many loved ones felt comfortable engaging with and offering and having uploaded was there. And I just think we don't know what we don't know. And so I think that the organizations that we're talking to are just doing everything they can to, based on what we know now, just try to build firewalls, customize all sorts of privacy issues. So that's the only thing that I think about. But I see massive upside for sure. And I'm just encouraging everyone to lean into it as much as possible. I have other thoughts on that, but that's my high level.
What do we say to leaders who aren't going to embrace this technology, right? Because there are a lot of people out there who say like, "Hey, I'm not interested at all."
Yep.
And so, what is your message to them?
I understand. I think of other times in our evolution as humans. For example, when that thing called the what was it? Remember there, like in the beginning in 95, folks were just not really sure that they wanted to do that, or they didn't want to use Easy Pass. And now I can't find a toll booth collector to save my life, right? Yeah. All these things. I think this feels akin to that, in that it will eventually just become the norm. So just to like the New York City subways, like they legit, like they won't take your token. Like there's no slot anymore for the token. What they used to want a slide through card. Now they just want you to tap with your phone, right? They just want you to go beep. So the folks who were just holding on to the token, like they just aren't going to get the uptown train. So I think that that's an analogy that I use, and I try to say it in the most, I ask them just to kind of start slow and start in a way that feels comfortable for them. Maybe, so in my world, you might want to say, I need to write a job description for an administrative assistant with 10 years of experience and someone who's done event planning as well as has a tremendous attention to detail for our database for contact management. And just see what it comes up with. And it is just a running start. And then, of course, you polish and you customize. But things like that just feel user-friendly, I think are a good place to start. Yeah, that's kind of what I would say. I always use the job description example because everyone in HR has had to do that at some point. And I think we also need to look to leadership to partner with our CIOs, our CTOs, and just develop, the goalposts and make sure that things are absolutely secure. That is the number one priority because we touch employee information, which is, my gosh, the most private thing ever. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that leading with a mindset of curiosity is super important on how we're going to navigate the future, right? And so thinking about how can we be curious, not saying yes, not saying no, but that middle intersection of maybe is where that magic can come from. Because these tools are, and this is a really important frame for a lot of people listening, when you think about exploring AI for your organization, you need to think about really kind of, and I loved your analogy about the ambitious, I would say, intern, right? These are never meant to be replacements, right? But these are meant to be accelerators to help us do the human work. Like you said, eliminate the joyless, repetitive things that we don't enjoy doing. So if you were to design a future workforce, right, to help you as the CEO of your role, do what you needed to do, you would probably build some very specific assistants that can help you do the highest leverage task possible. And that's a beautiful frame to kind of look at this technology through. But you have to be curious enough to get there in the first place.
Definitely. Yes. A quick example, a colleague of mine, Ian O'Keefe, is a company called Icona Analytics. So I was meeting with him right before we hopped on, and he was talking about in a talent management department, they do this thing called succession planning, right? You look at 100 employees, you think, who could be the one that could be our new chief marketing officer, right? And you run a succession plan for that coveted chief marketing officer. And what do you do to prepare for this meeting as the HR leader? You look at, for these 100 employees, performance review data. You might look at like Myers-Briggs or DISC or some type of like work style assessment that they've done over the years. You might look at written documents that they've done, videos of town halls that they've led. You might want to get 360 feedback of how people who are peers or junior to them experience them. Each of these, each of these data sources have thousands of pages of documents, and you might need an analyst from the tech department to kind of aggregate this information. So I don't know, data analysts about $250,000 a year, I think. And so what I've seen done and what Ian and I were talking about is the data that could take days and days, weeks to get, you could have in minutes by having a system ready that can take these very disparate, different formats. It's like merging something from like a PDF and Excel, right? It's like you can't do it. You're doing screenshots, and that's it. It's taking the data and bringing it together, and then just creating a rough framework to make sense so you have a running start for that meeting. That's a quick example we were just talking about earlier. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity for sure.
So let's put ourselves in the position of mentor right now, right? So no, it's absolutely guaranteed that there's going to be a young HR leader who's listening or watching this podcast today. And they're like, hey, listen, I grew up in a world where I thought I knew what HR was because maybe my mom was an HR leader or my dad was an HR leader, right? Now I'm thinking about what the future of HR is going to look like. From your unique perspective, with all of your experience in the space, Jaime, what do you think the skill sets of the future HR leaders should be developing today with the current landscape of technology and skills that you've identified that help, leaders be effective?
Yeah, great question. Having a coaching approach. So having the ability, so I would have them develop coaching skills, because so much of what is done on the daily is coaching a leader to have very difficult conversations with an employee. People would rather get their tooth pulled with that Novocaine than tell someone, hey, the way that you handled that meeting was not appropriate. Like, people avoid it. So coaching to be able to have coaching leaders to have those difficult conversations. Also coaching so that you can hold up a mirror sometimes for a leader and say, you are great at 25 things, but the way that you navigate meetings with sharp elbows and cut people off, it leaves people not feeling seen. Just to kind of, many times people are like, oh my God, I had no idea. Thanks for pointing that out. I had like, broccoli in my teeth. Nobody told me, like, thank you. But being able to coach, I think, is really key. Being able to have a consultative approach so that, disparate third party that is non-emotional and just says, I know that we want to do a big acquisition of a company. And what I'm realizing is that we're pro-conning two different companies we're going to acquire, but I want to make sure that there's a strong HR strategy for the business strategy. And this one organization that you all are leaning towards has a Glassdoor brand that's really tarnished. And I just don't think it's the type of people that we want to import to our culture. But being able to come at it and speak in those kind of terms. Also feeling really comfortable with numbers. So being able to quantify and show the return on any investment, I think is important. So you can be in a meeting where it's all about numbers and talk about the HR initiatives in the framework of numbers. Also someone who is not afraid to try a little code or do a little bit of tech, because so much of that will be needed for the future. And I think also an HR leader who I admire, last week, one of our clients said employee relations. She said she's just seen a slight uptick over the last, year. There's a lot going on in the global landscape. And I think people are bringing a little bit, of their true opinion. We used to say, bring your whole self. First was bring your whole self to work, then was bring your best self. And now everyone's bringing like their opinionated self to work. So someone who can really, like in the moment, really deal with employee relations issues, which is a fancy way of saying, people aren't compliant or they're not being kind to each other or not in the company's values, and to really address those real time. So those are the skills that come to mind. And then leadership, we're all, on a personal level, we're all, setting an example. We're all on brand for the company. We all want to, everyone at the company is really in recruiting, right? Just to make sure that you're showing up, and being, personally, in line with the values and are comfortable with leading as the gray and ambiguous always unfolds in a department. So somebody who can kind of lean in and take that leadership role for a project or so. Yeah.
Those are beautiful. And I completely agree with everything that you said there. So I want to give you an opportunity to put your futurist hat on, right? I am a guy who came from a big sports background. I was a baseball player. One of the infamous moments in baseball is when Babe Ruth stood at home plate and then called his shot to center field and then actually hit a home run to center field. So what is your Babe Ruth moment? What are you going to call your shot for the rest of 2025, 2026 in Inspire and in the space of human resources?
Okay. So first up, I'm going to keep my commitment. I'm really loving yoga. I'm going to do that 3 days a week because that helps me then show up in the way that I have all this energy for conversations like this. So I'm putting that out in the universe. For Inspire, we have done this beautiful, we just been able to create these community moments where monthly we host salons, or twice a year we'll get folks together in Manhattan to kind of sit around a table and have conversations, in a really safe space where people can kind of workshop all the things keeping them up at night. And I would love to have additional events like that in other geographies and, San Francisco and Dallas and, Boston and Atlanta, Miami, et cetera, to just to get other HR leaders to come together and talk about all the things. And to keep it real. That's something that I would love. The other is we are seeing more and more requests from organizations to import talent and do parental leave coverages or help if a position's open. And I think that with this uncertain economy, the speed with which those requests are coming in are going to increase. So always recruiting and we never want to get a request that we cannot staff someone for. So always having that strong pipeline of experts is another big goal of mine for this year. And I've got like 12 other things, but those are, and we're just always AI obsessed. We are just always looking for new ways to innovate, to free up time to do the more strategic work. So that as well. In terms of the field of HR, I think that we are at a moment where we're going to, I'm trying if my Babe Ruth moment, say it in the best way. I think that, just to keep it real, in the pandemic, HR had a seat on the table. We were elevated to mission critical permanently during that time. And I have seen, unfortunately, a chipping away at that over time, where we're not as much on speed dial. And I understand all the reasons why. But my vision and my hope, and I can see it, is that that role is having a stronger voice. Because I think that during times where the economy is unsteady and there's a lot going on globally, I think that people, more than ever, they're kind of looking to work to for vision and leadership and direction. And I think that there's no one better than HR to make sure that the culture is strong and that the whole employee experience is world class. And that can only happen if they're in those rooms and have that seat at the table. So that is something that I see coming. I also think what's coming is that more and more HR and tech processes will be just more symbiotically working together. So that's another thing that I'm kind of ready for. I love this question because I'm always living a couple of years. I'm like always in the future. So I love this question. Yeah.
Well, you were early to the party.
Yeah.
Oh,
can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
I am so focused on the impact of climate and work. So I give that quick example of, a hurricane going through the Carolinas, or, the payroll can't get done. That's real. So, we used to call it like emergency preparedness, and that doesn't even feel like grand enough of a noun anymore. I really think that organizations need to really think through how the work gets done, by who, and what we can do that is in our control to make sure that we are doing the very best we can to have our toolkit in place, so that it's not if you have an employee who has a weather emergency whereby they can't get really critical work done, it's when. And none of us have generators in our home office, to power a home office. Like if a hurricane comes through the Carolinas, the payroll isn't getting done in Carolina. So it's like, how does the payroll get done? So you have to think the redundancies across various areas based on the climate changes that we're living in. So that's my last thing about the future of HR. And I think HR could take a leadership role in starting to create initiatives around that. Yeah.
I love it. Well, one of our traditions here on the podcast, as we kind of put the wheels down, Jaime, is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question.
Oh,
now, this is going to be interesting. So I want to hear your perspective.
Okay.
On this.
Fun.
Their question is what mistake are you currently making?
Okay. On a personal note or a work note?
You can take it however you want to.
Well, I'm really bad at stopping for lunch. I start working, then I look up and it's 4:00 and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot to eat. So that's a quick work one, or a quick home one. But on the work front, a mistake that I'm currently making is probably not the being easy on myself that I always tell my team and our clients to embody. So I want to walk the walk. And I think I've been a little light on that recently. So I think I'm making a mistake because people need to know how it's done, and people need to also feel that they're working for someone that is a woman of their word. Yeah. So whenever we make a mistake, I'm always like, it's cool. So as long as we've learned 3 things, what are the 3 things? And I think that a couple things have happened recently where I'm a little bit like, oh, snap, how'd that happen? And I don't want to show up that way. Yeah. So that's my mistake.
Well, to be a great leader, we first have to lead ourselves, right? And I think that's super important.
Yes.
Well, Jaime, what an amazing time having you on the podcast.
Oh my God.
Here, just the discussion today it's easy to understand why you are the definition of Hart Hustle. So thank you for everything that you did here on the podcast today. Really appreciate it, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.